I grew up on the wrong side of the railroad tracks. I was born and raised in the Midwest, in a region colloquially known as the Rust Belt. And when deindustrialization, suburbanization, and white flight reached Dayton, Ohio, there was a disparate impact on neighborhoods, property values, and school districts. My community was located in the center of a food desert, surrounded by aging housing and zero economic investment. So naturally, I attended a high-poverty, under-resourced, low-performing school district from kindergarten through 12th grade. In the first grade, I was given the label gifted. I loved school and excelled in all of my subjects. I remember mastering my multiplication tables, being assigned more challenging spelling words than my peers, and reading anything I could get my hands on. Fast forward to high school, I graduated with a 1.2 cumulative GPA. I accumulated a total of 63 D's and F's on my high school transcript, and I collectively skipped over 240 days of high school. But before you label me a failure, let me tell you a few facts about my home environment. I grew up in a house that was hazardously hoarded. The conditions inside the home were deplorable, infested with rats and cockroaches, which made it difficult to eat, sleep, or to ever enjoy an element of peace. I used electric fans in the summers and space heaters during the brisk Ohio winters. Each winter, I could see my breath every time I spoke. I never hung a shirt up in a closet. I never folded one and placed it inside of a drawer, and I never learned how to make a bed. I went to sleep hungry every night for 17 years, and the majority of my after-school meals came in the form of chips, Little Debbie's, and sugary drinks from the local corner store. From the age of 2 until the age of 17, I slept on the floor, on what I was trained to call a pallet. Never once was I able to sleep in a bed because each bedroom was filled to the brim and inaccessible. I kept my meager school clothes in a black trash bag on the floor right next to me where I slept, in an effort to try and keep the roaches and rats away. On the days I did manage to attend school, I would sprint to the bus stop early and shake my backpack so I wouldn't carry any cockroaches to school. I never hosted a sleepover, and I never invited a childhood friend inside my house. Earlier this year, I read Bryan Stevenson's New York Times bestseller, Just Mercy. The book primarily follows the life of Walter McMillan, an African-American man who was wrongfully accused of murder based on the systemic racism in the community. But there was a particular passage in the book that gave me chills because of how it resonated with my childhood. It read, "If you act out by saying something insubordinate or refuse to comply with an order given to you by a correctional officer, you are forced to sleep on the concrete floor of your cell without a mattress." As a child, I always wondered what heinous crime had I committed to be sentenced to the floor. When I watched movies, I noticed that even the prisoners had beds. These moments had a profound impact on my subconscious and led to a devaluing of my own existence. In grade school, instead of paying attention, I would count my classmates and wonder if I was the only one sleeping on the floor. This anger manifested itself around the 3rd and 4th grade, and my grades and behavior took a steep nosedive on a path towards self-destruction. Many educational researchers have labeled this phenomenon the 4th grade failure syndrome. During this time, the gifted label I had been given was being slowly replaced by a new label, at risk. In high school, I vividly remember my algebra teacher from freshman year. He was an older white male, an ex-Marine with a snarky sense of humor. Usually he was pressing the small black button in the corner of the class to inform the school secretary that I was no longer eligible to remain in his class. But one day, after handing me back one of my lackluster exams, he said something to me that I will never forget. He said, "Son, some people take algebra too, but you, my friend, will take algebra twice. This was a profound moment for me because of the juxtaposition of being told that I was gifted just 8 years earlier by this exact same school district. Through a mixture of Saturday school, summer school, and correspondence packets, I somehow managed to reach the status of high school senior in lockstep with my cohort. And there was one day in particular that I happened to attend school my senior year that I will never forget. It was the day when 2 Caucasian admission representatives arrived at my predominantly black high school to deliver a presentation in the school library. Per usual, I tuned out, as I often did when adults stood in front of me to speak. I'm not sure if my executive functions had been altered because I hadn't eaten a nutritious meal in months, or if my attention span had been hijacked because I opted to sleep in my 1987 non-operational Ford Tempo the last few nights to avoid the rats. Or maybe I knew that they weren't there to recruit students like me. Nonetheless, one part of their presentation grabbed my full attention. We have a Chick-fil-A and a Pizza Hut right on campus in our main dining hall. For someone who had survived on minimal sustenance for over a decade, those words were music to my ears. And their next words were even more powerful. The great thing about Western Kentucky is we have 2 routes to admission, either a 2.5 GPA or a 20 composite on the ACT. For the first time in nearly 8 years, I raised my hand in an academic setting and asked, so if you have below a 2.5, you can still get in as long as you get a 20 on the ACT? To my delight, they confirmed and handed me a pamphlet with even more details about this mystical place. After the presentation, I snuck off and caught up with the recruiters just before they reached the metal detectors on their way back to the parking lot. I needed to confirm this peculiar admissions policy. I began prepping for the exam inside the house that I hated. I sat on a plastic bin with hangers pressed against my back and mice running across my feet. After 2 weeks of minimal preparation, the time had arrived. I woke up extra early to catch the public bus downtown to the prestigious private school where the test was being administered. I remember walking up to the school and noticed other kids being dropped off by their parents. Tight hugs and well wishes had filled the parking lot. It was at this moment I thought to myself, Shomari, what the hell are you doing here? There is no way you can score a 20 on this test. The 2 weeks of studying an hour a day was the most time I spent reading since the 3rd grade. I scored a 20 exactly on the ACT exam that Saturday morning and attended that very college because of a random presentation that made promises of a campus Chick-fil-A and access to a bed. My life changed drastically because of my score on that test. It was in this dorm room, for the first time in my life, that I had the ability to sit down at a desk, the opportunity to host friends, 24/7 access to fresh food, and most importantly, a bed to sleep in. We know that a child's listening and learning skills, behavior, and cognitive development all improve just by sleeping in a bed. And we know that being hungry is distracting and makes it difficult to focus. Imagine how many of our children are forced to overcome not only the structural inequities in our country, but are also chronically sleeping on the floor, going to bed hungry, and shuttled to schools ill-equipped to prepare them for the economic realities of the 21st century. Should some of America's most disadvantaged students be measured against students groomed from the finest private schools by way of standardized tests? In my unique circumstance, the standardized test was an equalizer. But I was only one missed question away from extending my 17-year sentence with oppression. The tightrope walk out of poverty leaves little to no margin for error. For a country that praises itself on meritocracy and class mobility, what upward mobility is truly available for children from the most disadvantaged backgrounds? I often wonder what my ACT score might have been that Saturday morning had I not faced such daunting barriers in my home life. My life has not been immune from unjust encounters with the police. It has included a laundry list of odd jobs that began as a 14-year-old janitor, and I've spent many of my adult years without health insurance. I once heard it said that the biggest market failure of all is picking the wrong parents. We should be investing substantially more resources into the communities, neighborhoods, and school districts that need them the most to help level the playing field for America's most disadvantaged children.